meeting to order. First item on the agenda, approval of the minutes. We have several this evening. February 6th and March 6th. We'll take February 6th first.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from February 6, 2019.
I have a motion. I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye. And I will make a motion to approve March 6, 2019 minutes.
I have a motion, I have a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Very good, thank you. Next item on the agenda is a public hearing. A major land development, preliminary plan submission, photovoltaic solar energy system, AP4, lot 25, 310 Main Street, Maxon Hill LLC, care of Anthony Del Vicario, applicant. I'll entertain a motion to open the public hearing.
Make a motion to open the public hearing.
Motion.
Second.
Second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Before we go any further, as was last time when they were here, I am a butter, and I spoke with our solicitor, and he said that I don't have to recuse. And that's my choice again.
But you're bringing it forward, very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Jim, quick recap before we go to the applicant, what do you think?
Well, the applicant gave us a submission back on February the 7th, and which gave me till March 4th to certify it complete. They replaced a number of things that they had in the first submission on March the 11th. Number of old plans set again, so I just replaced it. The application is complete. No question about that. We have letters from the building and zoning official, the fire marshal, director of public works has weighed in on this. According to state law, we have until June the 2nd to make a decision on this. Our regulations are a little bit out of date. It calls for 120 days, which would bring it to July 2nd. So I'm sure the applicant wants to adhere to the state law.
Sure.
So you have plenty of time to review this. I think it's pretty complete. I mean, the board here has seen the master plan, and the preliminary plan has even been enhanced a little bit more with landscaping. I think it's ready to, for the board to approve it tonight. I haven't seen any issues with it.
And then just refresh me, only because there's so much information in this particular package. What's the status of bonding on this particular project? Is there a bond in place? Are we talking about a bond? Will we talk about a bond? Where are we?
What would the purpose of a bond be in this case?
How about in the event that the applicant doesn't do what he says he's going to do?
Well, they have to build the project to the plan, the approved plan.
And in the event that the project got half built? Well, say something went awry.
Well,
What's our recourse?
well, we're reviewing this, as you know, according to our subdivision regulations, which were amended back in 2014, where we really eliminate bonding. Bonding was primarily used when public infrastructure is going to be built, such as a road, and we changed our regulations such that the roads have to be built and completed and accepted by the town before their plans are recorded and populated with residents. So, I mean, in this particular project here, there are no public improvements that the town is going to be accepting. I suppose the board could, as a requirement, ask for a bond on this to ensure that they, that could be a condition of approval if you want to do that.
Good.
But you have to determine what the bond is actually for.
I understand. Okay, so it has not been discussed yet? Okay, good.
And this is separate from the decommissioning.
Correct.
My thinking.
Okay.
Okay, good. Anything else? Jim? Okay, with that, we'll go to the applicant.
Good evening, Mr. down, Mr. Chairman.
I wouldn't dare. Oh, you might have to toy with it.
Really want my voice heard.
Here we are. Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. For the record, John Nancy on behalf of the applicant and owner of the project in the property located at Assessor's Plat 4, Lot 25. As your planner noted, we're before the board for preliminary plan review. We have been before the board at your last meeting in January, specifically January 2nd of this year, where the board reviewed master plan. Give a little bit of a quick recap, if you will. At the January 2nd meeting, the town had requested a peer review of the project. That peer review was completed by your engineer, Steve Cabral, from Crossman Engineering. There was a substantial amount of comments and a substantial amount of review that was provided from Crossman. That review was then revisited by Dupree Engineering, who's our project engineer, specifically Dave Russo, who has testified throughout this project, who's been on the design team from the very beginning, and you'll hear from him again this evening. We were able to respond to all of the items on the Crossman Engineering plan. Some of the major things that we have done with this project, as the board is aware of, and much of that has been as a result of some comments, suggestions that we received from the town, has been sort of the relocation of the solar panels, the reduction of the size of the overall project, the increase of the buffer, the increase of a vegetative run around the buffer, as well as some changing in fencing. We have also, at master plan, as a result of the master plan approval, obtained significant conditions with regards to the project, all of which we will comply with and must comply with for preliminary planning. In addition to that, this project also received a zone change from the town council. The town council in and of itself added additional conditions. So those are conditions that are incorporated in the master plan, will run through the project, and will ultimately be recorded in the land evidence records once approved. The submission, as your town planner indicated, was made in February. We did receive a certificate of completeness, so we're here before you. We have also have all of the state approvals necessary for the project, most important of which is the RIPD's permit from the Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management. That has been completed, that review has been certified, and we have presented that as part of our preliminary plan. What we'd like to do this evening is go through some of the changes that have occurred between master plan and preliminary. Those changes were a result of the comments that were made at master plan. They're a result of the conditions that were discussed at master plan. And Mr. Russo will provide that information for you. In addition, we have Kevin Alverson, who's the landscape architect. He's been one of the original designers of the landscape, and he will further delineate for the board the changes that were made in respect to the preliminary plan from master plan. And again, those were enhancements made at the request of the board. And they also include some of the fencing issues, which was a comment that the board had. And then finally, we have Nicole from Sage Engineering. She has also looked at some additional concerns or areas of concerns that the board had at our master plan, specifically with respect to noise, and we've supplemented some of our plans through the preliminary plan. At the end, we have, and this board has, received an extensive amount of information. We've provided you a great deal of information. It's been a long process, and we've gone through it, and we've made some tremendous strides as a result of the process in and of itself. So we're prepared to answer any questions that you as board members had, and of course as the public may have as well. So with that, unless there's any questions of me from a legal perspective, I would ask that Mr. Russo be able to testify and provide you information relative to the plan and what we're proposing this evening as a preliminary plan.
Very good, thank you.
Good evening. For the record, my name is David Russo. I'm a professional engineer with Dupree Engineering. located in Cranston, Rhode Island. So as stated, the project received master plan approval on January 2nd, and the applicant submitted the preliminary on February 7th. That included peer review as stated, and Crossman issued review comments February 21st of this year, and we responded to those comments, and after that, Crossman had a few additional comments which were issued February 27th. Those last round of comments we responded to in early March, and Crossman concluded in their March 15th memo that all the concerns they had been addressed. And they had 4 recommendations within that memo. The first one was for the final plan set to have a survey certification. A topographic survey in the location of stormwater systems has been based upon actual field survey, which we have completed. We will have the surveyor put a certification to that. The second recommendation was for all stormwater treatment systems to have horizontal dimensions on the site plans, which we can add on the final plans. The third recommendation was in regards to the plantings and a condition to require improvements if in-place plantings do not provide a full visual barrier during all seasons, which the applicant has agreed to, and that was discussed briefly at the master plan level. Their fourth recommendation was to reserve the right to measure sound for compliance at any time and at any location if there's a concern for excess noise. That was also discussed at the master plan. There was a discussion about periodic inspections, but the applicant agrees that if there's a concern, the town is more than welcome to review that noise concern. The plans that Crossman reviewed on the March 11th, the final review, are very similar in nature to the master plan layout that we had. At that master plan level, we did reduce the size of the field greatly from the original design. It created it didn't fragment the forest in the middle of the property. The major changes that we made, you guys heard that feedback?
You know, talk to yourself.
The major changes that we made on the preliminary plan that came out of the master plan discussion were along Maxon Hill Road. There's a lot of discussion about the buffering of the system along this road. We originally had a ring road or an emergency access road that ran parallel to Maxon Hill Road, which pushed the fence closer to Maxon Hill because the road had to be inside of it. We worked with the fire department. We had that there because we thought the fire department would want it. They actually told us, we asked them if they needed it, we'd prefer to eliminate it for the buffering, and they found that that would be acceptable. So we eliminated that road, which allowed us to push the fence further from Maxon Hill Road to the east and west. The other change that we made that came out of the master plan was the 2 fields that are along Main Street. The board commented if there was any way we could push those further east. We worked with the solar developers on that, and they found that, because they're looking at shading, how close they want to get to the trees that we can't cut. We ended up working with them. We moved the northern field 60 feet east away from Main Street, and the southern field we only can move about 25 feet east. So both of those were relocated. The other changes that Crossman Engineering had were more technical in terms of hydrology analysis, the design aspects. We had a conservative design. Crossman's comments added on to that, so we feel it's a really conservative drainage design with a lot of belt and suspenders, basically. We also, since master plan, received the approval letter from the chief of the Ashway Fire Department, which has been submitted to the town. We received a memo from the building and zoning official. His concerns were to ensure the existing dwelling is demolished and has all proper permits. That building will be raised as the memo noted. It would be a non-conforming lot if that were to remain with the residential house. The building official's second comment was in regards to communication with Ashway Fire District, which we've done. We submitted that letter. And then lastly, he requested a set of the final construction plans prior to any clearing to occur, which is acceptable. We will submit a copy of those to him. We also received a letter from Timothy Teft with DPW in regards to Maxon Hill Road. He requested when the applicant clears and grades the property for the project, they would like us to determine the source of and incorporate the source of the drainage issues that have been noted on Maxon Hill Road, and incorporate it into the drainage system to contain it and keep it from draining onto Maxon Hill Road. That comment came up at prior meetings. Master plan, one of the butters brought that up, and when that got brought up originally, we talked about the berm on the side of the road. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to enter an exhibit with some photos. When the abutter brought that to our attention at the master plan level, we were familiar with Maxon Hill Road, and our first, so we're not out there every day looking at every rainstorm on that road, but our first look at it was that there is a significant berm along the west side of Maxon Hill Road, which doesn't allow the water to get off the road, so it stays in that shoulder. That was what we stated at the master plan meeting, and we agreed to look at it further. Speaking to the town planner, he also acknowledged, because he drives by there quite frequently, that even when it's dry, there seems like there's water in the road. So we had a field engineer that lives in the area do periodic inspections, and what I provided to you are images that we took on back-to-back days. And one of them was a dry condition, and it actually rained that night, and then he went back the next morning. It was actually raining when he completed it in the morning hours. And what I'd like to do is just kind of walk through the images with you to kind of paint a picture of what we believe is going on in this area in the roadway. So the first image is image A, rain utility pole 43, and that's looking north down Maxon Hill Road. And if you look at the image, you can see right along the edge there's some sand. It looks drier type sand. And then as you approach that utility pole that's a little further down, you can see that sand is a darker color, and it starts to get a little more wet texture. And then B, image B is still in the dry condition, and that's located at the intersection of Maxon Hill Road. And again, that's a dry condition. It hadn't rained for a few days. You can see there's some visible dry sand, and then around the stop sign, there's a lot of wetness and visible water. And I'll go back to those photos. We then went out the next morning and completed inspection, and it rained through the night, and then that morning was still tapering off. And image C, the waters, as you can see, is very visible. It's stuck in the shoulder of the road. And what it's doing is it's getting stuck in the shoulder of the road between utility pole 43 and 45. And it's ponding very heavily in that area. And photo D, still looking north, just kind of as you're walking down the road, so you can see that water is just channelizing along the road. It has nowhere to go. It's just ponding there. Then as you go further down the road, because all this water just keeps going past the intersection, you get to image E near utility pole 49-1. That water is still visible. You can see it sitting in the shoulder. You go to F, and it's just ponding all down the road. F, and then G and H. You can see it all ponding, and it eventually leaches off the road into the isolated wetland onto this property. So what we've concluded with all these inspections, there's a very small area because of the berm that actually drains from our site onto the road. Most of this water drains this way, towards this wetland and towards these other wetlands. What we've concluded is that the water tables out here along the west side that we did the testing for, it's a 28-inch water table, 16-inch water table, and this one down here was a 16-inch water table. So it's not a seasonal high water table. So during the wet season, it's at its highest. So the water table is not that deep when the water's at its peak. This area of the road, if you look at the topography, and that's why this A and B image, if you look at A, when you're up in this higher range where A is actually taken, that roadway is only about a 3-foot, 2 to 3 foot cut. It's not as big of a cut up there. As you go further down, there's a bigger cut when the road is built. It's our opinion or our belief that that road being cut so much more, specifically in this area, where you see that wetness on the first 2 dry photos, we think the water table right along that edge is leaching out, basically because it's high, the road was cut too much into it, and the water has really nowhere to go. So that's more than likely why you're seeing that wetness when it's dry out. When a rain event comes, the water has nowhere to go, so it's just going to go find the lowest point, and it's just traveling down the road and going to this area. Our drainage design, and what I've shown on here, the orange highlights, we have a detention basin here that catches a small watershed that comes this way, and we have a berm here. So any of this water that comes, it's a small watershed in the pond here. We also have a swale all along here that will convey this water this way towards this large basin area down here. So our drainage design is capturing all the stormwater from our site and not allowing it to run on Maxon Hill Road. With that being said, we respect the DPW's comments, and the applicant, we don't mind working with the town, just trying to figure out. Our only thought to improve the situation is possibly where this is occurring, maybe putting some crushed stone along the edge of the road to convey that water off the road, and getting, maybe it's a crushed stone down to this area and there's a depression or something to that sort. We don't believe this site is causing it. It's obvious that it's an existing issue. I do think there's remedies that can help it, but I don't believe it's a cause. And we won't make that situation worse. If anything, we're going to improve it by taking that water and bringing it the other direction. That is a summary of all the changes that we made in regards to the engineering since master plan. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Planning board, you think you can go on?
I think you probably shifted yourself slightly about the drainage on the main Route 3. Because I think the discussion was having a pipe and having the drainage not be so centralized. Is that right? And you changed that drainage, right?
We did, yes. I can go through that real briefly.
Because that would be a major concern of the town, definitely the road.
So part of the review, when Crossman gave us comments, were in regards to some of these drainage systems. One of the changes that we made on the north side was there's a culvert that crosses Main Street in this area. We had a large stone infiltration trench already sized there. It's been improved by not creating a point discharge. So if water were to spill out of it, it's more spread out in that area. And we've also had a pipe within the stone that'll connect directly to that culvert, which should allow the water to go under the road versus over it. With that being said, these are very much oversized. We didn't account for infiltration on these, so it's very conservative design. I mean, just looking at that area itself, that trench takes up a very large portion of that cleared area.
So can you remind me again, so the drainage is this way, correct?
That is correct. All the drainage comes down. All this drainage flows. There's a small watershed up in this corner that goes this way. Other than that, all this goes this way and this way, through the wetlands and down towards the Main Street area. The south side did not change all that much in the last design. We actually took some things out to allow the water to flow as it does today, much more than we had previously. Previously, we kind of concentrated the water more. This design allows the water to go more naturally where it went before. We still have a large stone infiltration trench to capture the water, but it flows more natural to what it does today.
Is somebody else going to speak about the concrete, I was going to say the oil spill part that we talked about in our last meeting? Is somebody else going to speak to that later? Okay, no, hold on.
Anybody else planning? Can we go back to the Maxon Road? So I listened very carefully to you, and I understood pretty much everything you said, and I don't disagree. I'm a lifelong resident of down the road, and it's always appeared to be groundwater. Common sense tells me approximately how big an area is that you're going to be clearing in that upper section?
I don't have a number on that.
All right, well,
Yeah.
it's more than an acre.
Yeah, oh, yes. Yeah.
It's acres and acres and acres and acres.
There's a few acres of clearing.
Right. So common sense kind of tells me that, you know, with all best intentions with your design calculations and our best friends on earth, DEM, looking out for the town like they always do. I'm just concerned, suppose what you're doing there makes it worse. What's the remedy?
I mean, if that were to occur, it'd be on us. I don't believe that will occur with the
So I just wanted that on
design
the
right
record.
now. And that's part of the reason that we documented this. We
Yep.
went out there and did these inspections. And when it was raised to us, we wanted to see what the issue was.
And I have faith in you and your calculations, but common sense tells me that it would be wonderful if what you're doing makes it better.
Well, I can tell you that from our site inspections, there's not a lot of flow from our site onto that road. There's a very small watershed
Yep.
from this property onto that road.
Just wanted it out in the open, because I don't trust DEM. I was being facetious.
Well, Crossman did a very thorough review, so you should feel confident.
Okay.
While we're on that sheet, let me depart briefly, because I know that we heard a lot of concern from property owners on that road. Is there anyone in the audience who's been following this conversation and has questions about this specific feature? This would be an ideal time to address them. Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Come forward. Come forward.
hi, my name is Bruce Reynolds. I live at 103 Maxon Hill.
Would you be able to point to us, Bruce, just give us an idea?
This is 114.
14, I'm at 103 Maxon Hill, which is 11. I have a mailbox with a lake in front of it. If anybody knows Maxon Hill Road, I have wet mail all the time. The beginning of the property, you know, where Indian shelter rocks are, just across the street from the shelter rocks. The water problem is immense there. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's bubbling springs that constantly flow, My water table is a mess. It's ruined my pool water. Twice, okay? This has cost me, about $7,500, you know? I have to replace mine. The sump doesn't stop in my basement, constantly going. bubble. Now, your buffer zone, okay, now, I did my own measuring. Leaves my well only 80 feet from where you're gonna start clearing. What's gonna stop this from getting into my well? Anything? I don't see it happen.
Well,
Common sense tells me.
that's why I was curious as to where your property is located relative to the site. Are you up gradient, down gradient?
You're in the upper right-hand corner. Is that picture?
Right here. Okay. Back to Hill, this whole right here. Okay, this is my property right here. Okay? All along this whole, if you look up my back window, nothing but a hill, it grades up. And the water just flows and flows and flows. I've dug my own swale on the property to stop it from coming in the driveway. And try to keep it directed to the pipe. That's it. That's my house. That's what I do.
Okay, so now that we're squared away on that, the up gradient, down gradient, is the clearing going to affect as well, will it not?
I disagree with the whole project, my personal. But, you know. Everything you're talking about is the other end of the road. Not, nothing to do with this town. Okay, right here. Hey, this is all graded, all the way up. Oh, God.
This goes this way. There's a
No,
motion.
no,
No, there's
not
a,
that much.
yeah,
It's a total house.
yeah, I don't have to.
Okay,
Obvious right here.
okay.
So I'm gonna,
There's a lot going on here.
I'm gonna explain.
All right, I'll sit down. Okay.
No, good.
No.
And now you have to sit, I just want to make sure the stenographer is able to capture
Okay, I'll just
this important piece of information.
So, Mr. Reynolds lives at AP4 lot 60, which is located this house here. Like I said, there is a watershed. There's a high point here, and this water flows this way. The rest of it goes this way.
Does it currently flow toward his property?
Yes, there's a watershed, yes, there's a watershed that flows towards his property, and listening to what he's saying matches the topography that we have. So right now, that water flows towards your house unimpeded. There's nothing that stops it. It flows right to your property.
Nothing at all to stop it.
So right now,
Other
today,
than what I've done myself, digging on my own personal swale on my own property,
correct.
to direct it to the road.
Okay, so that water comes this way towards your property today.
Bubbling springs, right underneath the stone wall.
So what we're proposing in that area actually will capture that water. So this here, what this is a big holding area. So that will prevent the water from going on your property. There's actually a berm here that will stop that watershed from going to your property.
I don't see it happening. If you're gonna wipe out all these trees, to suck up all the water,
There's,
it's gonna make it worse.
those are part of our calculations we have to do.
It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, let him finish.
When you cut trees down, in a wooded site, there's a flow. When you cut trees down, the flow increases. That's obvious. The flow's gonna increase. We're required to size these to handle the flow for a cleared area. So this has been sized to handle that watershed for a grass area. Now, if you have, when this is occurring, if you still have water that's going, we could put a swale in. I mean, this is gonna stop that water from going towards your property. This is actually capturing that pond. Because if we didn't put this there, yes, you're correct, there'd be a very large increase in water coming from this sub-watershed towards Maxon Hill Road.
I disagree.
That's
Okay, you're certainly entitled to do that. Do you have any other comments for us?
Yeah, the buffer itself doesn't leave my well far enough from your project. And it is a concern of mine.
Sure. The groundwater flow, is it moving in the same direction as the overland flow, or is it different?
hard to, we don't have enough testing we only have 2 test holes in that area, and I wouldn't want to weigh in on that, but more testing.
Understood.
Well, it mentions it's 80 feet as well as 80 feet from where clearing is. Can you verify that number? Can anybody verify that number? And what is the approved amount? What should it be?
There is no regulation.
Well, the buffer they're laying out is roughly 25 feet and then another 25 feet of vegetation. Okay, I measured 50 feet out and then from back from there is my well, roughly 80 feet. Okay, and that doesn't strike me as what I want, okay?
Well, how far is it from your well to your property well?
About 40 feet. Roughly.
Would you estimate how far?
I measured the overall 80 feet to the stone wall, about 40 feet.
40 feet from
35,
the well to
40
your property
feet. Yeah, no, even less. 20, 25. It's not far. It's not far.
Okay. So you realize that
It's just
you
scary.
can't really control what goes on someone else's property, right?
I understand that, but it's just a scary scenario. Is all it is to me. I just, you know, how are they going to stop it from leaching into the field if it gets in there? What are they going to do? What do you do? How do you stop that? From getting into it's the aquifer we're talking about. You know, it's just crazy.
If I can, Mr. Chairman, we understand the concern, but I think that the board should recognize, and most importantly, the neighbors should understand that the process here is to do exactly what is being done, that is to protect the abutters and to most importantly protect property owners that are nearest to the project so that what is there today does not become aggravated, but remains as it is, and if not, become better. And the important thing to note, and we can put this on the record, is our liability, there's exposure on our end. In the event that the calculations conducted by pre-engineering, the approvals issued by DEM do not comport with what actually happens after construction, there is a remedy for that. There is protection for that, and that will be part of any project, any plan. Even if we were to come in here and do a 35-lot subdivision, you'd have the same issues and you'd have to have the same safety mechanisms in place or safety gaps in place. That would be all the drainage preparations, all the proper analysis to ensure that there's proper flowage and that we've captured that flowage in a manner that best preserves what is there now and not make it worse but better. So what I'm hearing is there's a lack of comfort with respect to the fear of what may happen there. That comfort should be alleviated by the fact that there is going to be an operation management in play. There's going to be a management entity that's going to operate this for a long period of time, that's going to have significant interest in ensuring that this property does not in any way, shape, or form affect the properties around it. And the most important thing, and this is what I think you should walk away with, if there was a subdivision here, developer goes in, builds the house, sells the lot, leaves. Then it's homeowner versus homeowner. We're not leaving for the next 20 to 25 years. And we have a power purchase agreement in place. There's every reason for us to be here to ensure that the project is, one, completed according to the plans, completed according to your subdivision regulations, completed according to around laws, and completed according to DEM regulations. And if any of that is a misstep along the way, you have an operator here who's responsible, who's going to be here to respond to it. That's the best protection you're going to ever have. Yeah. Oh, that's right. My client mentions, it's a very good point. We've agreed to a peer review engineer every year. So there's going to be periodic inspections done during the course of the year to determine the complexity, whether or not this project comports with what was done. And during construction. That's right. Okay. So I think those are important points to keep in mind. This has been extensively done, not haphazardly, but with some significant eyes on it.
May I ask a question? Mr. Russo, can you tell me when the swales get put in? So there was a solar field down the way on 138 that had also received DEM approval and all of that. And during the construction, there was a lot of rain and a lot of the dirt went onto other abutting properties. And as Mr. Reynolds is downstream, so to speak, does the swale get put in first? Do you understand my question?
I do. I'm familiar with the project that you're speaking about.
Yeah.
I won't get into the detail on that one. I'll speak to this one. But what we do is the downgrading areas, we add soil erosion control. So, and we double it up actually around the wetlands and then sensitive areas, butters. And what that means is there'll be a silt fence, and then there'll also be a silt sock at the bottom of it, which prevents any of that, sediment. I'm gonna get to the runoff. But any of the sediment from getting off the site, it does prevent some of the runoff.
Okay.
We're also required to have temporary erosion control measures in place during construction. So every section will have a temporary measure, which will be a swale and a temporary holding area to convey that water so it doesn't run off the property until these permanent basins or trenches are established.
So then you can just state for the record that Mr. Reynolds isn't going to have additional water during construction? There.
That's correct.
Okay.
I'd like to add to that. In your conditions, number 16, it clearly says that during construction, that the town engineer or designee shall, at the expense of the applicant on a monthly basis during construction, inspect the premises. And then during the month of April each year thereafter, after the completion of construction, there's going to be another inspection. And said inspection will include a review of any and all reports as required by the state of Rhode Island and the town of Hopkinton, federal government. The applicant shall reimburse the town for any cost incurred as specified in the stormwater facility management agreement. And I remind you, this is part of our approval. So in the event that this is not complied with, I should say, it's grounds for us to reappear before the board to address the issues.
I'm just making sure Mr. Reynolds heard, sir.
Yeah, I understand. I want to make it for the benefit of the record, the benefit of the board, and most importantly, the benefit of the abutters, because I feel that there's a sense here that they're being abandoned, and I don't think that that's these are your conditions. You did this specifically so as not to have that feeling from them, and this is an extensive expense on our part, so we also want to get credit for the fact that we're not abandoning anybody.
I get it. So, but I think Mr. Reynolds feels a little abandoned, so I just wanted to make sure that.
Yeah.
So, sir, if something happens and you got a lot of stuff on your property and you during construction you got to go to the town and they're supposed to come and fix it. Right. So.
We've got enough problems there.
Right. I
don't need
understand.
any more.
I get it.
By the same token, we've got a culvert that goes from his property over to
If you'd like
Woodlands.
if you'd like to come forward, I'd be happy to hear that comment.
Do you want to speak to one of these points?
Probably not. I don't think it's on there.
Name and address for the record.
Lynn Upkeer, 100 Maxon Hill Road. There's a culvert that runs from Mr. Reynolds' property to the property next to mine, which is the Indian Rocks shelter. I try my best to maintain that because I find the town doesn't really do it. It gets clogged. Mr. Reynolds' property looks like it's got a pond on it half the time. I feel bad for him. I try to clear it out. I don't have any more confidence that anything that happens on this is going to be taken care of any more than the culvert is maintained. That's my concern.
Understood. Thank you.
Before Mr. Reynolds leaves, do you have a dug well or is it a drilled well? And how deep is it?
It's a drilled well, it's approximately 83 feet deep.
Very good. Is there anyone else who has questions about this topic? Specifically the Maxon Hill Road issue? I see no.
Could I just, if I were to speak now, would that, I would not be allowed to speak?
Yes, you only get one pass.
Just asking.
I'm only kidding. Come forward, Steve.
Thank you. My name is Justin Bentley. I'm on the lower end at 138 Maxon Hill. I'm basically at the opposite end, the very tail end of the drainage problem. And I just, again, just expressing major reservations. I'm not an engineer. I trust their expertise, but again, I know they can perform calculations, but to remove such a significant amount of the sponges of the trees and that area, and I know they'll set up the drainage, but I just wanted to express that I've lived there for 20 years, and it's very wet, obviously. I just, again, as the previous resident Lennon said, that I just have serious doubts and concerns that anything that's done, even despite the engineering, would improve the situation. I think we're looking at, it just seems to me, we're trying to catch it and keep it from getting worse, and that's, to me, just seems like a recipe for problems.
Thank you. More than one copy.
Barbara Capello, Hopkinton Town Council, actually. One of the things we discussed when we were doing the PSES ordinance that we changed that might be something for you to consider is that instead of doing monthly inspections, doing construction with weekly inspections on the PSES, and it might be something you wish to consider in an application like this rather than monthly. That way you can nip things in the bud a hell of a lot quicker than the problems later.
Anyone else on this topic? Otherwise, I'm prepared to move on.
Sir?
Yes, sir.
Richard Langseth, of Warwick, Island. I'm just a little confused by the big circle. Is the retention pond including some of the solar panels? What's that line on
This,
yeah?
that's a topography line, a grading line. So that's
Oh, I
just-
see. So the pond is obviously beyond the panels.
Yeah, we've analyzed the ponding to see how high it goes relative to the panels.
Oh.
That's a topographic line.
Okay.
Very good, thank you. Okay, I think we've covered.
Do you have any questions?
Also, Mr. Chairman, on that note, keep in mind that the peer review of the project will also be part of the tool that the town has to ensure that the inspections as they get done are being done in accordance with what the plans are. If there's some field changes that peer review or inspectors or the town engineer does a need this size are necessary, those can be done and handled. Again, we want to just, the point here is to give you the proper information and then make sure the safety valves are in place, and I think we're doing that. The next aspect of it that was also part of the discussion throughout the process has been the screening and the buffering. Obviously, a project like this has two, very different from your normal development. There are two key components, one of which we've addressed, and that is the drainage aspect as it relates to the clear cutting of such a large area without putting structures in place, similar to houses and lawns and sprinklers and the like. The second is the screening, and how we're going to address that. And we've gone through a whole series of different proposals. We've added to additional vegetation. So I want to have Kevin Alverson, who's been the landscape architect on the project, walk that through and show you some additions that we made as well.
Thank you very much. My name is Kevin Alverson, and I'm a registered landscape architect in the state of Rhode Island. I've been in front of this board a number of times, but in a nutshell, for those who have not met me, I was tasked with landscape architectural component of the project, which, as Mr. Mazzini had mentioned, is largely based on trying to obscure visually the new solar array and its associated components from the abutting properties and roadways. As Mr. Russo had mentioned before, we've gone through a number of different versions of the layout. At the last meeting of the master plan, we did present the layout similar to what you see right now, which significantly increased the buffer, particularly at the northeast section of the site, but allowed for a contiguous greenway throughout the entire property. In addition, since the last, at that same meeting, the applicant had also agreed to decrease the spacing as well as increase the sizing of all the plantings. That was reflected on those plans as well to further obscure the solar array. And we have also made notations and testaments to the fact that following completion of the clearing procedures, installation of the supplemental buffering throughout the site, that we are willing to also have the site reviewed at that point as well. Should there be particular concern from any various view quarters that may have been inadvertently missed throughout the process, and reviewed by sort of an independent counsel that would be at the behest of the town, paid for by the applicant. So with that said, we have made our best effort to minimize that concern by increasing buffering wherever possible, and also kind of moving things around strategically. Mr. Russo has also mentioned earlier that based on some concerns by the board at the north, along the western side of the site, abutting Main Street in particular, where we were able to push the panels further inward into the site to increase the spacing. I've updated the drawings that are part of your package as well to reflect that, including the cross sections as well as the specific landscape plans for the focus areas. Along the eastern portion of the site, along Maxon Hill Road, we were also able to eliminate that service access road, which is basically just a crushed stone surface road. But by doing that, we were able to push the fence significantly further into the site without hindering access around the panels, and it allowed us to also maintain some additional lower shrub vegetation that's existing there. And on top of that, what we've done is supplemented that planting accordingly and adjusted plantings from previous incarnations of that. Similar to past presentations, the focus of the buffering, we broke it out into 5 different areas. Those are all noted in your set as well. There's the northeast section, the northwest section, southwest section, and then we broke up the abutting portion along Maxon Hill Road into 4 different sections. From the last version that you had seen, largely section this is the northwest corridor along Main Street, largely has remained the same, other than the fact that we were able to get the panels further away. And if you look at sheet L7, or I believe it is, we've updated the cross sections accordingly, which pushes, this is a cross section through that northwest section of the site, and you can see that the panels, granted it's probably hard to see from your seats here, but the panels are further back. They're actually 150 feet now from the edge of the roadway. We also have a grade differential of, I think it was 15 feet or so, existing grade change. We're maintaining a buffer of 25 feet around the entire perimeter of the site. That's essentially no touchstone. But in addition to that, we've increased that by another 25 to 30 feet of plantings on the interior of that site. The next section at the southwest corridor, southwest section of the site, again abutting Main Street, largely unchanged from the last presentation that you've seen, except for the fact that the panels have been pushed further back as well. We have increased the buffering further, decreased the spacing, increased the number of shrub plantings, and sort of adjusted them to try and hit some other particular view quarters that we've seen since the last application. Again, something that can be reassessed once the plantings are installed to make sure that we're covering all those bases. The fencing also has been pushed significantly further into the site, so this being a 60 scale, we're probably 75 or 80 feet in from Main Street where the fencing is actually placed. So the plantings, wherever possible throughout the site, the plantings are actually on the outside of the fencing. At the northeast corner of the site, largely unchanged. Again, this is the area of the site that the panels have been removed from. So we feel as though other than the fact that there's a little bit of thin buffer through here where we have increased and added some potential plantings to things, we do have a 75-foot buffer that's meant to just remain in that area. And then as you move further down Maxon Hill Road, You can see here, what's indicated in yellow is shrub vegetation that's meant to remain. So other than some limited clearing of some larger trees that may cast shade onto the side of the panels, all of the there's some stand of mountain laurel and things in that nature. There's some blueberry. That's all meant to remain in place. The fencing has been brought in to the site. It's about, I think it's about 30 feet off the panels, or about 20 feet, I'm sorry, off the panels on the interior of the site. We've provided additional buffering shrub vegetation that will get to a height of 10 feet or so it won't cast shade, but it'll also block the fence. Then you have your shrub vegetation to remain, and then we have our mixed evergreen buffer all along in front of that. The green denotes larger evergreen trees, placing shrubs. Largely the same as you move further south. And then at the very southeast corner of the site, there were some modifications to the entranceway to accommodate some of the comments from the fire marshal as part of removing that access road along the eastern section of the site. So it adjusted the placement of the driveway a little bit, but we also at the certainly once we get a connection with National Grid, we are proposing to move the poles interior to the site to the most possible. We do have to have access, certainly out here on the street. I'm not the interconnection person, but the poles are conceptually pushed into the site, but waiting for National Grid's approval for that. But you can see that we have actually increased the buffering of the shrub plantings as well from those areas. I did, in addition, the cross sections remain largely the same. We talked about the cross section in the northwest corner of the site. Everywhere else, it's largely the same. This is further down the southwest section of the site. Again, you can see that we're maintaining 15-20 feet off of the edge of pavement. Then we're maintaining 60 feet to the fence line and 112 feet to the first panel from the street. There is about a 6 or 8 foot grade differential as well, so the plantings on top of that, the evergreen trees, are going to be between 10 and 12 feet tall at installation size. The shrub plantings are going to be, I believe, 4 feet in height, so if you can envision 4 feet on top of 6 feet, we have 10 feet of buffer to start. And there were a couple cross sections that were taken through Maxon Hill Road. Again, largely unchanged from the last application. The northeast section, there's really, from the closest abutter, there's no panel anywhere near it. Further down the road, the closest panel is about 235 feet from the nearest abutter. That's 135 feet in from the edge of pavement on Maxon Hill Road. And I did also update the visual renderings that we had prepared last time, so you get an idea of plantings at installation size. This again is this is from the northwest corner of the site, looking south on Main Street. You can see the grade differential that's there currently, so this is the existing condition. The supplemental plantings will be on the inside of the existing vegetation that's meant to remain, so that's what we see here on the bottom image. From the driving perspective, driving south. Driving north on Main Street, again, this is around pole 277, which is located right down in this corner here. You can see that there is a grade differential, not quite as much as on the other, but there is about 6 or 8 feet of grade change before the next panel. We're maintaining the buffer along the edge of the road, and we're planting behind it similar to the other section. And these are 2 views along Maxon Hill Road. This is sort of where the buffer is thinnest currently. We wanted to be able to kind of take it from a worst-case scenario look along Maxon Hill. You can see the existing power lines that run through here at the pole. We're maintaining the little bit of scrub brush that's in there, but we are providing a new dense evergreen shrub buffer as well as tree buffer behind that. This is where the road runs. Again, looking north, this is at the access point to the site. So again, kind of a worst case scenario than in this corner, the southeast. You can see we're maintaining the existing vegetation to the greatest extent practical. A no-cut zone of 25 feet in, and then we're providing a mixed buffer planting, mixed understory trees, evergreen shrubs, deciduous shrubs, something to provide some biodiversity. There's not a lot of understory there right now, so we really want to increase that buffer significantly in that area. Those were really the extent of the changes to the plan. There was a comment that was made by Crossman Engineering about refining the wording for this review of the buffer following installation. So that's something that will be spoken to. The wording needs to be worked out through that. But we feel as though we're putting our best foot forward with sort of heading that off as much as we can to start. Any questions on the board?
Thank you. Let's just, my only question, and first of all, I want to applaud your thoughtful efforts here. The screening has always been central to my concern. I think you've done a good job. But I will admit that my concerns are dramatically softened by this idea of having an independent review the project after the installation of the vegetation. So I don't have to criticize you too severely if I have the opportunity to do it on site after everything is completed. So I appreciate that the language needs to be refined, and I don't plan to do that right here. I'm going to leave that to other folks. I just want to make clear that I understand the intention. You have a set of plans, you have a planting scheme that you're going to implement, and at the end of the installation, should the town, and I'll put town in quotes for now, because it could be comprised of abutting property owners, who knows who else. If they are not happy with the screening that's in place, we're going to be able to approach this independent registered landscape architect that the town will designate, the applicant will pay for, and ask for their input as to how to remedy that. And then, I presume through discussions with yourself and the applicant, you're going to come to some agreement as to the fix. Do I have that essentially correct?
Yes, that's correct.
You do, that's exactly correct, yeah.
Okay. Good. That's my only question and concern, and I think it's a great thing to put on the table. It alleviates a lot of...
And by the way, we're also willing to do the same with the drainage. And that we think is already in your conditions. So, two very important points. One is, once the project is built, you'll get a better, you can take these plans, you can actually not only visualize them, but you can feel them. And if there's issues of areas of concern that we're discussing now that you believe have not been fully discussed, your independent consultant, your independent engineer can address that in conjunction with our engineers. And that is for the vegetation as well as the drainage. And in the condition, as I know I keep coming back to it, because the condition does say that we're subject to annual inspections and we're subject to monthly inspections during construction. If you feel you want to increase that to 2 inspections per year, that's fine. I mean, the point is we're here to address the issues now and at the time that this is constructed and after it's constructed. And that's the difference with this project compared to other developments that you have. And there's really no magic terms to it. The essential
aspect of it is you have an independent review, just like Crossman has done. I mean, the purpose for Crossman was to come in to confirm these plans. They did that, and they provided an extensive amount of comments. We responded to those comments, we met their checklist, they've confirmed it. Now we can do the same after the project's developed, or I should say constructed.
Planning board, other questions?
Can you just, I think I might have missed it, so your plantings for the slat fence are in front of or behind?
The plantings are between the fence and the abutters.
Okay, so you have the solid fence.
Yes, with that said, the fencing along the southern edge is the only area. We do provide plantings on both sides of it, but this is where that solid panel fence that you're referring to.
Oh, I thought the solid panel was along Maxon Hill.
Well, along Maxon Hill, so the question came up at the last planning hearing of whether or not that was something. The applicant is certainly willing to do that if we
Oh, I
would like
thought
to.
it was in the plan, sir.
We're still calling out a privacy fence, which would be either that slanted fence or like a black fence that has privacy slats in it, but,
Oh, then we need to get a little more specific today then.
okay.
Yeah. Because I thought it was a wooden opaque fence.
The applicant is certainly willing to do that. The intent with, when we push the fence further into the site by 30 or 40 feet, we felt as though it actually goes away a lot better than a solid panel fence, a wood fence, from a visual standpoint and buffering.
Because when I read the plans, I saw it as being a solid panel, and then, so that's why I was asking my question, sir, because I thought, like, well, are you planting in front of it, or, I was a little confused.
We are planting in front of it.
Okay, so you were planting in front of it, but at that point, it wasn't a panel fencing. See, that's what I read, panel fencing to be specified by you, landscape architect. This whole blue line here, and I assumed that it was, in the prior page, it was the slats. But you're telling me that that's not correct necessarily.
That's correct. Our plan currently is still showing a black, oh, I'm sorry, no. I'm sorry, I apologize. Yes. Along here, we have a 6-foot-high solid panel fence along here. I apologize.
Okay.
Yes, we did.
I know
We
there's a
specified
lot
that.
of different areas. Okay,
Yes.
so that is a wooden slatted,
That's correct.
and so there are going to be plantings in front of
In
that.
front of it as well, yes.
Okay, and so as Mr. Reynolds is here, and you're on that southern edge, he's getting just a chain link fence.
No, that's actually solid panel fence
Oh,
along the
that's
southern
solid
edge.
as well. Is that demarked? Just make sure. Because, oh yeah, you're right, that said it's panel fencing along this edge here.
Yes.
Right, okay. And you're gonna do in front of that as well?
That's right, yes. We have larger tree plantings on the back side of that,
Okay.
where right along the edge of the no-touch buffer that we're planting, the fence is going to go inward of that. We'll have plantings between that no-touch buffer and the fence, shrub plantings in front. That will get up to higher than the fence.
Okay. And I'm sure your council would, I know that we've said this somewhere, that if something happens to the fence, the applicant's gonna replace the fence?
Yeah. That's correct.
Just to be clear, right?
Yeah, that's one of the conditions in the master plan.
Okay.
Just want to read it for you. So it's in two areas. One is the applicant shall be responsible for the cost of maintaining the PSES and any access road unless adapted as a public way, and shall bear the cost of repairing any damage occurring as a result of operation and construction. And then also, the applicant is obligated the applicant shall maintain the PSC in a new, clean, operable condition at all times, ensuring the structural and technical integrity of the facility. All maintenance shall be performed in a timely manner. Maintenance shall include but not be limited to structural repairs and integrity of security measures.
Oh, could we say fence in there somewhere?
Yeah.
Just so that it's clear for me?
Sure.
And specifically the wooden fence, panel fence. I know because you specified, sir, that it was going to be like non-rotting fence, but I don't know if I've ever seen a fence that doesn't rot, so.
It's a cedar panel.
Right, right.
It's rot resistant.
Rot resistant, that's
Pressure
right.
treated.
Right, right, so, right.
Sure, so what we'll do is we'll repeat that condition for preliminary plan, and we'll specify the fencing.
Okay.
And then we'll call it the fencing for not only security measures, but specifically for scenic purposes.
Okay, yeah, and I'm not too keen on the like slatty thing. I don't know if I'm gonna speak for others. I mean, the slat, I'm
I
not,
apologize, I misspoke before, I was getting confused with another area and what we had transpired. No, it's clearly,
okay,
we
okay,
have.
all right.
It's identified in the plans at
Yeah.
L5. It does say 6 foot height solid panel privacy fence along the entire eastern project limit.
Okay, and southern then as well, because that's
East-
eastern.
It is noted on the sheet L6
Right.
as well.
Okay. Okay, just making sure. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
That's all. Sorry.
Rick, any questions? Yes?
You're planting evergreens and I'm not an arborist. Are they going to grow to a point at which they'll need to be capped or topped or?
Where we've placed the evergreen trees, so that's a strategy behind the sort of layering of the plantings. The trees themselves, we planted them far enough away from the setbacks from the solar panels that they won't affect the shading of it to any great extent.
So
Typically, we do a 3-to-1 on the southern edge and a 2-to-1 on the like side, on the east or west sides.
So they'll reach full mature height and they won't need to be.
Yes, unless there's some freak one that, maybe goes up and, but at that point, it's going to be 40 years down the road probably, so.
I do want to echo, I thought you did a great job, and I really appreciated
Well, thank you.
in those areas that it was centered where you had the additional buffering. And I don't know if the neighbors, I don't know if you've seen it, but they really have attempted to screen as much as they can, so.
Thank you.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to offer questions or pose questions? Yes, sir, come forward. This is the second time.
To second that, I do appreciate the very meticulous nature, the details that have gone through. They tried to make everyone happy here. But I just have kind of a question that we're hearing from the developer. The applicant is a developer and we hear that they'll be there. These stipulations that are in place are for the maintenance during construction. But what happens when the project is sold? And does the developer then the applicant then continue to be responsible for the life of the project after that? Or does it fall upon the purchaser? I guess it's more of a question.
Let's get that answered for you.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. And that goes to the essence of the approvals. So the approvals are not the approvals of the applicant, but they're approvals that run with the land. So as a result of that, the ultimate operator or end user of the land will be the responsible party for all of the conditions. And so there's no escaping the conditions because they are part of the approval. And as a result of that, if the conditions are not maintained, whether if there's no compliance with the conditions, then the town has the opportunity to enforce them. So they're not personal obligations of the applicant. They are the conditions of approval that the property development is subject to. And that's in the land, similar to an easement that runs with the land.
Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes, very much. I just, one quick follow-up question?
Sure.
Sorry.
Sure.
Three. That actually addresses that perfectly. But just to add on to that concern that it would be sold, my understanding to the next company to purchase that may potentially be an LLC that in a worst case scenario could go belly up. And I know that where this application is put in prior to the ordinance that we worked very, very hard to develop, none of those stipulations apply from the ordinance, but I guess my concern it would ease my mind greatly if there was some type of an escrow account similar to what was put into our ordinance in this case as well, that as it's sold, I know that it's agreed upon that the future purchasers will take care of it, but that's a lot of trust in people that we've never met, that we don't know, that are LLCs, that have no legal binding responsibility once they fold. So just comment, 2 cents.
Understood, thank you. Anyone else on these topics? Yes, sir, I'm sorry.
My question is going to be,
Name for the record, please.
Laszlo Hegedus, and I have property abutting on the south central next to this project. And my question would be, with all these abutment landowners, what is going to be the process to, when you have these third-party reviewers looking at it, and if the homeowners aren't happy, what is the process going to be for the complaints? Is it going to have to be before a town meeting, or is it going to be just walk into the zoning office?
So that language has yet to be established, and that was the little back and forth there about refining the language. We haven't done that yet.
Okay.
So,
And, I mean, is there going to be penalties, or, I mean, is that going to be part of the language as far as if it's not going to be enforced?
I'm sure the planner will make some notes about that when he starts working on the language.
Okay.
So my advice would be, I don't know if we're going to get to this evening, but you want to stay in touch with the planner's office for that precise language.
Okay, will that be in any form of paperwork? Is it going to be
Absolutely.
in the approval process?
Absolutely, it will be written down, recorded.
Okay, and then my second question is, what, in this plan, what are any provisions for wildlife? I mean,
Specifically what?
well, I was just talking to somebody that lives off of Collins, and they had cleared a large piece of property at the bottom of Maxon Hill. And what happened is now they had a pack of foxes or whatever, coyotes, whatever, I mean, and now they've all, they cleared that land, now that they're basically going to other properties, trying to find homes. Plus, with all these fences and everything like that, what's going to, I mean, I own basically, down below there is 27 acres. So is that going to be the new wildlife refuge because there's nothing on it? You know, I mean, I don't mind, but I mean, it's just you've got whatever, 135 acres, and you're going to clear so much of it, something's going to happen.
I understand. Okay, we'll see if we can get you an answer there. Council, you have
I do, so 2 points. One, with respect to the language, the process we would envision is not any different than a process the town already utilizes, and that would be the enforcement of any zoning ordinance or building regulation that's not complied with. So your zoning enforcement officer or your building official would be the first level of contact to enforce compliance. And if compliance is not then enforced, there's a daily penalty for every day in which compliance is not enforced. That's already a mechanism in place. That's how you do for those that are violating local ordinances, building a garage where they shouldn't be putting it, or a shed where they shouldn't be putting it. So that's similar to what we would envision, and ultimately when we discuss the language, that would be kind of the process that we put in place. So I think that, again, not far into what is already being done in town, and you want to stay consistent with what you already do. So you do it every day, you're going to be able to continue to do it with respect to this project. Second, with regards to wildlife, as you know, Stage Engineering and Nicole Melaniphy has testified before. She's here again tonight, and she will address specifically the issues with regards to wildlife. And one of the important aspects that we've done, which has been a major and actually significant substantial change to this, is to create that corridor, that open corridor where it provides for, and that's this whole aspect here, provides for displacement of any wildlife to stay on the site. But can't guarantee that the foxes and the turkeys and the hens and whoever else cross the street, because I live in Cranston and I got 20 turkeys in my backyard. I don't know where they came from, but maybe from Hopkinton. I wasn't able to question it, but it happens.
Yeah, they relocated. Yeah. They relocated from.
Yes, sir.
My name is Joe Moreau, and I'm just confused on one point. At first, we were told that the property was not going to be sold, but then we have some conversation as to when it is sold. Is there anything in writing that stipulates that this property will not be sold to another developer? That's a question.
I don't think we're in that business, but I'll let council address that.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if there's some confusion, but it was never stated that the property would never be sold. And I don't see how anyone could ever say that. It's like someone saying your house, you can never sell your house. What was actually stated at the last hearing on January 2nd is that there is actually an operator that's prepared to purchase the project in its entirety in the property. So the property is always perceived to be sold. The owner is Maxim Hill. The approvals run with Maxim Hill, which is the current owner, and when that owner transfers or conveys title to the new owner, the approvals go to the new owner. What we stated at the January meeting is that the new owner is also going to be the operator of the project, and that operator also has what's called a power purchase agreement in place for the end user of the power that's going to be emanated from this project. So, and that's important because you have now already identified who the long-term operator is going to be and who the power source, who the power purchaser is going to be. So we have the power source, we have the operator, and now we have the power purchaser. The power purchaser for this, as we identified at the January meeting, is going to be the airport corporation.
Okay, very good, thank you.
The only other question I have is as far as the shrubbery. What are the plans to replace the shrubs or anything that's planted there once the deer take care of that? If you look at Route 3 down here with the buffer zone and the borders that were put up in that project, they're about this high now that the deer found out where they live, where they are. So what are the plans for that, please? Thank you.
Yeah. I can actually talk to that with experience too, because this winter I had to put saran wrap around my shrubs as a result of, I guess, the deers who decided to join the turkeys. Again, that's addressed in the maintenance plan that's going to be provided in the inspection during. So clearly, if the buffer that we put in there does not last over a year or 2 years, we're going to hear about it. And we're going to have to be obligated to come back and ensure, because the obligation is to ensure that that buffer and that screening remains where it is for the life of the project. So that's contemplated and expected that the operator is going to have to replace trees on an annual basis. It's very similar to what you do in your own yard. Right? You know, some of them don't survive in the winter.
Is that notation on the plan, the way it normally is? Replacement after...
Yeah, we have a standard 1-year warranty that's noted on the plans. These are looking to speak to, we can address them.
A little bit longer. Yes. Great, thank you. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Very good. Yep, go ahead.
Out of curiosity, from the time of construction starts, when do these shrubs and fences and buffers all go into place? When do they set?
So typically, the clearing procedures would happen, and then we would start to, in strategic areas, we would want to get the buffer in as soon as we possibly can. So as they're constructing in certain portions of the site, we obviously wouldn't want to put plantings that could get damaged during that time, but as soon as possible after that point. So we conceive it to be an ongoing planting throughout the construction process, as much as possible without damaging the plants.
Anyone else on this topic? Yes, sir.
My name is Richard Langseth, Bud Long Farm in Warwick. And at the last meeting, we talked about the rock shelters and some of the concerns I've had. And it seems like they've done a great job. It seems like they've addressed the concerns, and I'm very, very pleased to be part of this process. But I do have one question, and it's the gate itself. It's not clear to me where the gate actually will be, and will it be a chain link fence gate? Will it be a wooden gate? And are there going to be signs on the gate? You know, because the people in the rock shelters would appreciate as close to nature as they can. And the road really needs to be near the rock shelters, I presume. So it should be accommodating to the people in the shelters. So I do have that question. I do have one comment too. It turns out that the town had an agreement with DEM to conserve the rock shelters. And that agreement ran out in 2005, and DEM is going to approach the town to renew that agreement. I don't know when that's going to happen. And I suggested that people participate in that. I haven't really gotten too far on that basis with the state, but I think that input should be given when that happens. And maybe the planner would be aware of that and let us know if that comes to be.
Okay, very good, thank you. Can we get an answer to the question about the gate?
Yes, so there will be service gates, obviously, at any of the entrance. At any of the entrance points. Where there's a wood fence, we will have a wood gate for it, and where the fence is proposed to be chain link. In the areas behind the plantings along Main Street, those will be chain link gates. So there's a gate down at the southeast corner of the site at the site access point. There's one at the northeast area of clearing. And then there's two on Main Street. There's one that's just a short drive in, just enough to get a fire truck in, which we work with the fire marshal on. And then the one at the northwest corner of the site is actually going to be located within the already disturbed, cleared access road that comes into the property.
And how about the issue of signage? The question was specifically on the gate, but is there some signage along the fencing of the entire project?
Actually, I think Mr. Dussault wanted to speak to that.
The only signage on the fence is the typical emergency type contact signage that's required by National Grid.
Got it. 10 by 10, 12 by 12, every
Inches, yeah.
100 feet or whatever they normally do.
Exactly, yeah, there'll be no commercial type signage.
Good, thank you. Does that answer your question, sir?
Yes.
Anyone else here? Otherwise, ready to move on?
Any questions?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Jeff Light, 43 Forest Pine Drive, Valley. I believe Amy asked about the oil, the cargo material, the containment for that, so hopefully we can get some clarity. From the SDS on the material itself, it says foam, fire extinguisher powder, CO2, or gaseous existing agents would be required to sustain or to alleviate the fire hazards. I'm just wondering with the high water tables how that might be not influenced or compromised, as well as the accidental release of the material says do not allow to enter into sewers, surface, or ground water. Given the topic of these water tables and changing directions and trying to make water go uphill instead of downhill and keeping them separate to get together, I'd like some clarification on any possible remedies that we can get down to the details that affect the lives of the people that live at the butters. And speaking of the lives of the people in this town, I understand the property is now zoned, it's no longer residential, so it's mixed use. So although this is a wonderful presentation and all of that, if it's mixed use, maintaining the town comprehensive plan, is this really the best compliant alternative for such a beautiful property that could bring more value to the existing residents who are proud to live here, and others who would like to join us and be residents here for all the reasons we decided to live here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I guess we're all set. Next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So to that point exactly, the conditions that master plan, specifically under number 10, state that any equipment that utilizes fluid shall be outfitted with a containment mechanism sufficient to contain
at least 125% of said fluid, and which prevents said fluid contact with the ground. That's the condition, that's the requirement by which we have to live under. And Sage Engineering has done further research and review. Nicole Melaniphy from Sage Engineering is here tonight. She'll address that issue along with the other issues that were also talked about, including noise in the species and essentially the environmental impact.
Hi, Nicole Melaniphy, a registered professional engineer in the state of Rhode Island with Sage Environmental. I'm going to first answer the questions kind of in the order that they've come. So first, there's the question about wildlife and what's being done to lessen potential impact to the wildlife. The fencing, as you may or may not remember, is going to be raised 6 inches, so small wildlife will be able to traverse in and out of the solar array area. So the small fox and whatnot, they actually will find some of those areas and create dens there. Larger animals such as deer, it will be stopping them. I mean, it's not too high. They could still jump the fence, unlikely, but possible. Also, the revision that was done since the original plan to what we have now, it's opened up so that there is that corridor between the east and west side of the lot that really is beneficial from the wildlife perspective. So a lot of effort has been done to try to not impact the wildlife as much as possible. And then in addition to that, in the areas where there's been the clearing from a shade perspective, where there can't be tall trees, but we can put bushes and we can put wildflowers, we're putting in a pollinator mix to enhance a pollinator habitat, so to increase birds and bees and bats, and really to contribute to a habitat that isn't a lot in Rhode Island. The meadows have kind of done away in Rhode Island because there's not as much farmland. We have actually more forest than we did 100 years ago, and so it may seem small, but it is going to add several acres of pollinator habitat that's not there right now. So those are some benefits that we've done from a wildlife perspective. Then to go to the question about secondary containment. So in concern about impacts of water table and if there was flooding or anything of that nature, the transformers are on raised pads, so they're not right in the ground. And as part of the condition, there's the requirement for containment. So not only is the town put the condition, but also there's a federal condition based on the quantity of oil that they have to have containment for that. And so there's a system, it's a geomembrane system developed by CI Agent. And here are just some pictures to see what it looks like. And it's a specialized containment system that's designed specifically for oils. And I verified that the transformer oil that would be used on this project, which is the environmentally friendly one, EnviroTemp, is compatible with that, and it is, and they have tested it, and it's used for other solar projects in and around this area and nationally. And the way it works is that this liner down here is impervious, so if something were to leak in there, it can't go into the ground. And then here is the wall of it, the burned area, and that is a polymer mixture that when it rains, water can flow through there. But should there be any oil, it reacts with it and creates a solid barrier. And so the picture that we see on the left is how they're installing it, and then the picture on the right is after installation. So you actually don't see the containment, it's actually all underground, but it's designed so that it will allow water to flow, but then if there was ever a loss of containment to any of that transformer oil, it would stop it. And these transformers are on sensors that go back to the operator. So if there were a leak, they would be notified that it's occurring and they can come and respond to it. But the containment's in place to prevent anything from happening between them getting there to respond to it. So I have additional information on the noise and measurements, but I don't know if anybody has any questions on this before I go on to,
Oh, yeah.
okay.
Okay, so first, in doing a little bit of research, CI Agent doesn't own this product anymore.
Correct,
This business has been sold.
to Just Right.
Correct. So
Yep.
what do we know about Just Right?
They are internationally known for their containment systems. They're used heavily in manufacturing areas. If you go into, just as an example, also safety equipment too, if you go into any laboratory, all of the containers that are used to store hazardous waste are Just Right containers. I shouldn't say all. Most common container when you go in is a Just Right container. They have flame arresters on them. If you go and get secondary containment in a manufacturing area, if you've seen them, the spill pallets that are raised, those are Just Right spill pallets. They have also temporary portable secondary containment, so if you are going to do emergency response to the site and you need an area for decontamination, they have these portable units that can go out. They're actually a much larger company than CI Agent. It's actually, the way I look at it, better. They're bringing in CI Agent is a smaller company, and so having this larger company is actually better.
So what I was really after was this other parent company now has a track record that we can rely upon, that you can rely
Yes.
upon as you become responsible for this.
To be quite honest, I had never worked with this product until I started looking into it, and I was actually cautioned because I had never heard of CI Agent. And then when I started investigating that they were actually now owned by Just Right, it was actually okay.
So the other questions I had is, in your explanation of it, which rings true with my own research, in a rain event, water passes through. In the event that there's a petroleum product that's going to somehow react with this material, it's going to form a solid.
Correct.
Now, does that solid have to be removed? Does the composition of the solid change? Tell me what happens.
So if there were an incident where this oil leaked and now that barrier has turned solid, this whole system, the barrier has to be removed. Because you can't turn it back to something to allow rainwater to flow
So
through.
one-time use.
It's a one-time use, correct.
And then my last question, at least for the time being, my reading suggested that this was sensitive to soil type. Two different kinds, as I recall. Is the one that's being contemplated compatible with our soil types?
So that's one of the things that we work with their engineering team at CI Agent / Just Right in regards to selecting the appropriate geomembrane for the soil that's there to make sure that it's being done correctly.
Understood. So this will then also spill over into the, no pun intended, the groundwater conditions of the site. In your collaboration with the manufacturer here, they're going to select a product that can be installed close to or in the groundwater, right?
Well, it's not going to be in the groundwater. The water table is below this because it's not that, because the pads, these pads that you see here. So this is actually an example of a transformer, and it's raised, the pads themselves, so that this is actually level with the ground. So it's not, it's down to just about a foot or so.
So that picture that I'm looking at to the left shows an excavation of, it's got to be at least 12 inches. You got a 16-inch water table,
Yep.
maybe 20.
So that would be one of the things that would have to be part of the engineering design, is looking at all those details. Because you can't, one of the nice things about this system is the company that owns them comes and oversees the installation of it, because it's an insured system, which means they ensure that if there's a leak, it's going to contain it, and if it for some reason didn't, they're liable for that. And so they come and go through the whole installation process to make sure that it's being installed correctly. So it's not as if you're dependent on a third party putting it in. The person who actually manufactures it is the one that comes and oversees the installation.
Okay, so at what point do you envision, let me call them final design plans for that installation?
I'm not quite sure exactly when. It would come during, once they've decided exactly for the location, which I believe now we have decided on it, and then looking at the height that needs to go into it. The groundwater table is a big portion of it, looking at the soil evaluations, and so it really just needs to go to that next step to have them come in and put together their design package, and by them, I'm referring to CI agent and engineers.
So is this going to be part of your final plan submission?
Yes. Yep, we can do that.
Okay, I think that's all I have for now on that particular topic. Planning board members, anything?
Yes.
Actually, it's kind of impressive, the thought process that's been put into this, but it makes me think, what's the probability that there is going to, something like this is going to happen? This needs to be installed.
And so it's a very low probability that you would have transformer oil leaking, but it's a precaution that's taken in case something were to happen, but it is a very low probability.
No statistics available.
So when I was looking to find some statistical information, I didn't find any transformers that were using EnviroTemp. I was looking at those specific transformers that were used here that had any releases. But statistically, it's a smaller pool of data, so you still have to take precautions with things.
Thank you.
Planning board, anything else? I did have one last question. In your research on this project, did CI agent ever pay out on their $7 million policy? Has there ever been a failure on this project?
They've never had a failure. Yeah.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to pose questions to this expert on this particular topic? Yes, sir.
How many transformers are on the site?
So this map that you're looking at here, I'm going to get into a little bit more detail, but I'm coming to it because if you can see the pink dots that are right here, these are the locations of the transformers. So there's 5, there's 1 here, 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 and here.
Answer your question? Okay. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Is this the polyurethane XR5 that you're talking about, rather than a conventional high-density polyethylene?
Are you talking about for the geomembrane? I don't remember the specifics. I can provide you the spec sheet. I have it right here. Let's see if it says. Some of also just to point out, is part of the engineering based on the soil type that they're going to have from an installation perspective. But if you'd like,
Here's that on there, that's from
they have a copy of it. Would you like another copy?
Oh, okay. If they have a copy, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions? I see no hands. We're ready to move on.
Okay. Since I have it there. So, as explained earlier, the layout of the site changed, which meant the transformers and the inverters changed as well. They changed in location and they changed in number, going down in all cases. Less inverters and we have less transformers. But we still wanted to evaluate to ensure that this change, and especially spatial location, would not cause any problem in regards to sound at the property line. So we evaluated and have determined that it would not exceed 40 decibels at the property line. That 40 decibel threshold, the closest point is 131 feet, which is about 80 feet further away than previously. So its sound is even lower at the property line now. These recalculations were done the same way that were done previously, assuming very conservative evaluation, such that there's no trees, there's no buffering. It's assuming that this is just an open platform and sound would be just traveling without anything impeding it. So we actually would expect sound to be less than what we're calculating here. Just as a note from previously, when we initially looked at this, we did look at the sound and the ambient background sound, and it ranged between 33 decibels and 81 decibels, which those loud sounds were where the cars were transporting, especially along Main Street. It wasn't as loud on Maxon Hill Road, but we did get interference from the cars as well. And putting that into perspective, typical wilderness sound is 35 decibels, and so the sound that you would be seeing at the property line would be comparable to your typical ambient wilderness. One of the other conditions was to have the applicant measure the sound and verify that when it is installed, that the sound is not exceeding 40, that the sound emanating from the inverters and transformers, as those are the equipment that generates sound, does not exceed that 40 decibel threshold. So it was submitted to you, it was reviewed by Cosman, where we put together what the sampling plan would be for, or not sampling, but the measurement plan for the sound. And so it would be following national standards developed by ANSI and ASTM in regards to measuring sound. We use the type 1 noise meter, which is the most precise noise meter that you can obtain. It's one that's recommended for environmental noise studies. Using the ANSI method, they have what they call type C, which is a type of where you select your meteorological conditions and the time that you're going to be doing measurements, such that you're doing it during your worst conditions. Worst conditions meaning it's going to be the loudest possible conditions. Sound would be measured at a minimum of 1 day, potentially more. In addition to that, we would measure it to ensure that it's long enough to give us a 90% confidence level, meaning we're getting enough sampling points that there's not going to be a variability. It will be at least at a 90% confidence. To evaluate, we'll also look at it excuse me, as what sound is seen is observed 90% of the time. As sound varies every second of the day, to try to do some type of comparison, you have to look at it from a statistical sense. So we'll look at what's the sound 90% of the time during the day, because during the day is when sound is going to be emitted. And so to determine the sounds emitted from this project, we first have to understand the baseline, what is the sound currently there. So before the project begins, we'll conduct a baseline study. These blue triangles that you see here are the suggested location. The town may select different locations if they would like, that we would do the baseline study. And that would be before any of the solar equipment turns on, so that we can understand what sound we're working with. So then, after the site becomes operational within 90 days, we'll then go back and measure the sound and remove the background sound and compare it against that 40 decibel threshold to ensure that there's no sound emanating over 40 decibel. We would go back to these 4 locations, but again, if the town has other locations, we can go to those other locations and compare it back to the closest location. That's it. Oh, one other point is, if for some reason the sound did exceed 40 decibels, then the applicant would go back to that area where the sound is louder. It's not expected this would happen, but if it did, or we can put sound curtains around it, and then we would go back and remeasure it to verify that it is below 40 decibels.
Thank you. And so just so that I'm clear, and again, forgive me, noise, that's not my... So the 40 decibel threshold that you're discussing does not include the ambient sound level.
Correct, it's just the sound emanating from the facility or from the operations.
So if the ambient number is 30 right now,
Yep.
and the noise emanating from the transformers is equal to or less than 40, is 70 the number that we're going to hear standing at the property line?
No. It doesn't get additive that way. So when you're looking at decibels, it's actually on a logarithmic scale. And so when things are being added, you're looking at it, you can't just do a 20 plus 20 to get 40 decibels. You have to bring it down from its logarithmic atom and then re-put them to their log scale.
So when I'm standing at those points, everything is operational now. What number am I going to measure?
So when I measure it, I'm going to be measuring a combination of your background sound and the instruments in operation. And then when I go back, I'm going to be extracting the pre-measured background sound to get the actual sound from the inverters and transformers. And so you'll be able to see both of them, but it's going with extraction of the background sound, I actually, Mr. Cabral and I were going back on how best to try to extract the background sound, because another approach looked at was the sound that a human ear can distinguish the difference of is 3 decibels. And so when you are at the very low threshold, so low meaning you're at that ambient ambient noise of 35 decibels. And if I was looking at that and the difference of 3 decibels, it would need to be extremely loud in order for it to make that difference. I don't remember the numbers off the top. Don't quote it. It was in the 50s or 60 decibels in order to make that difference. I'd have to go back. I don't remember them off the top of my head. Versus just removing the background sound, that difference in sound is actually much less. It was only about 1 or 2 decibels was the difference, which would not be perceivable to the human ear. But it is specific to where you're at and what the background sound is and what the observed sound from the equipment is.
So forgive me. The question was, what number am I going to observe when I'm standing at those blue points when everything is operational? What I'm trying to get to is, I would like to have something on the record that says the number should be approximately X.
Right.
So that those in the audience understand that when they go to those points, when the system is operational, the number should be X. And this does not come as a surprise later on. So what's the number?
So right now we're calculating the sound to be below 40 decibels at the property line. We know that the existing ambient sound is also around 35 decibels for that area. So when you add the 35 and 40 decibels, it is less than a 3 decibel change. You should hear an audible difference. I can grab my phone and do the calculation and tell you the exact number.
Yes, for me. Put it in the right order of magnitude. Is it 38?
It would be around there, yes. It wouldn't be greater than 40 decibels.
That's what I need.
Yes.
Good. Good. Thank you.
And so when it changes in time, as the system ages, then we could have, it's not that complicated of a measure. The town will be able to have someone go out there and measure it.
So one of the conditions was you contact the owner and they'll go out and redo the noise measurement following, I wrote the specifications, so that let's say it's 15 years down the road, they have exactly what was done previously, they can follow it, and it's ensuring that the noise measurements will be done again, measuring the worst case sound, meaning the loudest possible sound, and the background sound. So one of the things that we can even make in the condition is that the town receives all of the raw data from the background sound measurement, so that if it is another engineering firm that's doing the noise measurements, they have the actual raw data to be able to make that comparison without any troubles.
So it's going to be an independent measure, right? So the town will have a say to make sure that whoever's going to do the sound is independent of the owner. Is that right? Because I wouldn't want there to be any seemingly conflict of interest of the owner hiring their engineer versus the town hiring the engineer to test for sound, right?
Yeah, you could partner. I don't have any problem with the town selecting who's going to do the noise measurements, correct?
Okay.
Anybody else? Anyone in the audience on this particular topic? Yes, ma'am. It would be best to come to the microphone so we capture that comment. Thank you.
I got confused with the baseline reading. Is that before all the trees come down, or after the trees come down, and now we can also hear the highway on top of everything else?
Well, I don't think the specifics have been determined. The way that the condition was written was that the equipment would not make a difference of 40 decibels. So in order for it to clearly represent the equipment, it would have to be before the equipment turns on, so meaning after the trees are cleared, because the baseline, when the trees have been removed, is going to be different than the baseline with the trees. It actually, in some cases, I can't say for certain because I don't know how it's going to be impacted, but trees are actually noisy whether you think of it or not. And so, for example, when I was out on the site collecting noise measurements, It was louder right here in the field where you could hear the rustling of the leaves versus when I was in the middle and it was actually protected from the wind. And so it's hard to say if when it's cleared, it possibly could be less noisy, could be more noisy, but in order to get a fair representation of actually what the sound is from the equipment would be when, before they go live. So the equipment's installed, it's exactly the way it is, that we can really get a true baseline, because that baseline is going to be following it through the life of this project, because there's no other way to get the sound when it's not operating.
Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Anyone else? I see no hands. Thank you.
An additional point, so when we are referring to independent engineers, that would be exactly right. Independent engineers, not chosen by the applicant, but chosen by the town. I mean, we think that's the best mechanism, the best way to keep that sense of independence and that sense of controversy as far as the applicant or the owner ultimately is concerned. With that, Mr. Chairman, we have given you our presentation as far as the preliminary plan is concerned. It follows in line with the master plan, specifically the conditions that were proposed at master plan. We've addressed for you the site layout, the changes with respect to that site layout with respect to master plan in reference to preliminary plan. We've also addressed the drainage and the issues of areas of concern with regards to that. Also, per your request from the master plan, we've also had the opportunity to address the screening and the buffering, specifically the fencing associated with that and part of the overall buffering and screening strategy. And finally, we've addressed your environmental concerns. What I would ask is that I think since your peer reviewer is here, probably a good idea to ask peer review if there's anything additional or comments and changes or essentially confirmation of what we've done in conjunction with the town's engineer, Crossman. And at that point, we would be happy to, again, incorporate the conditions of the master plan and then add some of the conditions for a preliminary plan. And one point at the beginning of the meeting, the chairman had noted something about a bond, and that's actually in the master plan. One of the conditions is that the applicant and owner will have a contract performance bond in place with the builder of the PSES by issuance of a building permit with the amount to be determined at preliminary plan stage. So we can also address that this evening, or we can leave that for an issue at final stage.
Good. So let's do that. We have our Crossman representative is here. So excellent set of comments on the plan. Again, I applaud you for that and thank you. So based on what you've heard this evening, in conjunction with the plans and data that's been submitted, any comments, additional information that you'd like to provide the board?
Yes, for the record, I'm Stephen Cabral with Crossman Engineering. And the unique aspect of this design and review process is that at the master plan stage, which is usually conceptual, the applicant actually submitted a project that was essentially fully designed. And that occurred back in, I think it was August of 2018. So for the past 8 months, I've had the opportunity of not just reviewing the project from conceptual design to final design. Our primary focus has been working with the applicant and the town staff to actually refine and make the project better. So I do believe we were fortunate that at master plan they did have a detailed set of plans. And I honestly feel, as the independent reviewer, that the project has improved significantly. You know, from the fact that we have the much larger wildlife corridor, the drainage system has been revamped considerably. When it comes to drainage, from the beginning, the computations were always reasonable, but we always had a concern that the design concept was going to focus the discharge points at each of the quadrants. So after working with the applicant's engineer, the on-site detention infiltration systems were actually enlarged to the point that they didn't need to have a point discharge. If there ever is an overflow, the system's now designed so that it will overflow over much wider width to more mimic the existing conditions. applicant's experts testified, the landscape buffering has been expanded, the noise issues have been addressed, the containment issues have been addressed. And I don't say this lightly, I honestly should compliment the applicant and his team for being willing to work with us from the beginning. You know, there are projects where we issue comments and there's a little bit of a pushback, but not from this team whatsoever. Every comment that we ever had, they were willing to recognize the concern and they worked with us to resolve it. And so I believe they did a good job. And I'm not seeking any additional information at this point.
Very good. Thank you. Okay, we ready for a wrap-up? Aaron?
Couldn't say any better than your engineer has said it.
Okay. So, we have a preliminary plan submission. I will be candid that I want to tell you that I think you've done a great job in moving the project forward from where it was initially. You certainly did not have my support at that point, but you've made tremendous strides. Many of the things you put on the table, I'm very comfortable with. I do feel, though, that there are a lot of moving parts. There are a lot of things that I would like to work into a motion. I leave it to my colleagues. Is this something that we do right now? Is this something that we need to meditate on? Jim, feel free to chime in. I'm just looking for a little bit of guidance. We talked about a lot of things here this evening. Just would want to ensure that we get all of them in place should the board decide to act favorably.
Well, it's up to the board. I mean, you could approve it tonight the best you can with the conditions, and you could always have the applicant come back before you for final. You could delegate final to administratively as well. I mean, it's entirely up to you folks.
Okay.
Where you're comfortable.
Leave it up to my colleagues. That would depend on what we're going to do, I suppose. If we think that we're done collecting data, then we will close it.
If I can offer one final, I would urge the board at this point to at least consider giving preliminary plan approval, because there really isn't any additional data that we can supply. We've given you everything that there is here. And the unique aspect of this project, as your own peer reviewer has indicated, is this project came to you already fully engineered. It's already gone through an extensive review process. It came here fully engineered. The process of going from master plan to preliminary plan here was not to engineer the project, but was to tweak it further to, again, be more aggressive on the issues of concern that dealt with drainage, dealt with screening, and dealt with environmental. Those three prongs have been met. I think we're open to conditions, and I would suggest that it would be in order to have a preliminary plan approval subject to administrative final with conditions, or refinement of conditions at final plan. But at least it allows us to continue going through the process, so that because essentially waiting for another hearing process when there's no more information to give is a waste of the board's time and the applicant's time.
It's never a waste of the board's time.
No.
So I'm not really suggesting pause because you have not provided anything, or is there's something more that you could provide. That's not my thinking.
Okay.
I'm reluctant to move a project of this magnitude forward with conditions that are nebulous, and someone is going to refine them in the future. That doesn't really work for me. This is not a two-lot subdivision that we can just flip to the planner's office and say, we don't need to see this again. It's not that kind of project, not in my mind. And so I would be much more comfortable if the conditions were thoroughly discussed, agreed upon, and formalized as part of whatever motion comes from the board. That was my thought process.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that, because clearly what these conditions are, they should be detailed enough so that 20 years from now, if there's not a lot of ambiguity and room for discussion or dispute, let alone debate. So I don't disagree with that. But I think we're now talking, I mean, it's the board's prerogative, I don't know how many conditions we're talking about, but certainly we could still approve master plan, subject to refinement of the conditions that would be reappeared or reviewed at final plan. So what we are reviewing at final plan is the wording of the conditions to ensure that they are to the point of satisfaction, as opposed to a regurgitation of information.
That sounds extremely reasonable. You would prefer that? Absolutely. Everybody else?
Well, the only concern that I do have is that this, these basins, if they haven't settled on materials and whether or not it's gonna work. And would there be a massive design change in that holding if that material didn't work? Would it be okay and they could just do something else and that's fine?
No, I think, please correct me if I'm mistaken, my experience in these matters is they're going to bring in the manufacturer's representative, they're going to tweak some little design thing, and then they're going to finalize a set of specifications that will either appear on a plan or in a report. I don't think it's going to change materially what we sort of see. Correct me if I'm mistaken.
That's correct, because they can change, so in order to hold the, let's say they had to go shallower, they just have to make the area bigger.
Okay.
And so, because the intention is it needs to be able to hold a certain volume, so you can either make them taller or wider, that have more surface area. So that's what the engineering committee would come in and they'd have to look at that site specific, see where they can place, how deep they can go, what the soil type is, and they would have to set those specifications.
Okay, and so that wouldn't change the layout of the arrays then? If they have to go much larger, that would all be?
It shouldn't have, I mean, it's not expected that it would impact the size that much. I can't say with 100% certainty in terms of the actual data, but there's enough room that it shouldn't be problematic because there's enough space between them, because there's not anything blocking them.
There's no trees.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so, and I agree, that's my concern. So how do we, what do we do to say that on the topic of secondary containment, that there are going to be conditions that are regulatory requirement? I'm okay if everybody else is that way. And agree to it, and there can't be any disagreement.
Chair, can I make a suggestion, just trying to think practically? This is a transcript that's going to be prepared of this hearing, I assume. And in that transcript, if someone on behalf of the board can go through it and sort of pick out what seem to be potential conditions that could be then brought to the next meeting to establish the conditions. Because it's a record being made of this, that it's all there.
I concur, it's
It seems to be
the task of pulling it all together that.
But we have to act on this by June 2nd, I think Jim said. So it seems to me we have time to get the transcript and to have it start looked at. I don't know how long it would take to do that. But, well, we get the transcript, if we can find out when the transcript is likely to be ready, that's step A, and step B is to have some people start to look at, just looking for these material conditions, potential.
And if I may add, Mr. Chairman, if you look at the master plan conditions, a lot of them are laid out there, and they're very specific, and I think what we could do is make them even more specific. I think that's a good baseline to begin with. Obviously, we'll incorporate all of those conditions, and then you can start there to look at what you've already conditioned the project, and then go through the transcript to see how you want to better refine it. For example, with regards to containment, it says any equipment that utilizes fluid shall be outfitted with a containment mechanism sufficient to contain at least 125% of said fluid, which prevents said fluid contact with the ground. I think that addresses the issue. Now, our obligation is to put the mechanism in place that addresses that. And you actually heard the testimony that the entity that actually sells the product will be installing it and will hold responsibility for it.
Yeah, see, that's exactly the kind of language that needs to be incorporated at the preliminary stage. And I
just did it for you.
I don't hear my colleagues talking about the 15 conditions that we're going to put on this evening, ready to go.
I only had 3, so.
Being somewhat facetious. So in summary, I would be advocating that we follow the solicitor's tact, that if you want to poll to see how we're doing in terms of the preliminary, that's great, but I don't see the actual motion coming down until we have the opportunity to go through the transcript. I presume that Jim's going to be the one that does this, and come back to us with a set of conditions, a tentative set of conditions for our approval.
I concur.
If someone wants to do it right now, I'm okay with that. That's the only logical way I can see it happening. Make sure we cover all of this. No.
I thought there were 3. I was
Yeah.
wondering with you, sir. I mean, there was like the independent review, there was,
I would think
you know.
procedurally, I think you can approve the preliminary plan subject to refinement of conditions to be presented at the final. That gets us to the final plan, and then the final plan, you can incorporate all the conditions that you've installed from the beginning, and you can kind of make it into a final plan decision.
See, I was hoping that we would nail down the preliminary and hand over the final to be done administratively. The way you're proposing, you're going to come back one more time for final anyway.
30 days. So the alternative is if we come back in 30 days for preliminary, and we come back another 30 days for final, or there's another 30 days for final being administrative, it's still.
Anyway, you've heard my 2 cents.
Yeah.
I'll leave it to somebody else to decide whether it's good or bad.
What are the 3 issues that you've identified?
So I've identified the issue with regards to the fencing, which would be that there should be specifically the fence that's utilized for both security and screening measures to ensure that it is that the structural repairs, the integrity of that fence is maintained. That's one. Second is that once the project is completed, town engineer or designee shall inspect the PSE and its drainage monthly during construction and annually after the project is constructed. And then the final element I had was with regards to the containment mechanism, and I think that that's still addressed in number, but that's actually already addressed.
We need to have the arbitrary registered landscape architect in.
Yeah, that's the,
and I think we decided weekly during construction.
I think we should come up with, I think Barbara's made an excellent suggestion. I'm not sure it has to be weekly throughout the entire construction process, but there are certainly going to be points in the process where weekly is going to be superior to monthly. Again, that's a detail that I think we should hammer out. There's also the issue of bonding where we have to actually set them out. So there's a little bit more than 3.
I think some more conditions should be put on the, at least more verbiage on the landscape.
Yeah.
Maintenance.
I think that the applicant came a little bit short of outright acknowledging that the water that's coming on Maxon Hill Road is coming from their property. Now, what I witnessed is clearly bleeding out from that property. Whether it's, now again, I know it's high off the road. If there's a 16-inch water table, it could be blowing out the side of that berm. And so my thinking is, if in fact that water is coming from that property and going on town road, that's that property owner's responsibility to ensure that they contain it.
Okay.
So I guess my question is that going to be done?
Well, two points to that. First of all, the watershed that's actually draining to the road is a small watershed. It's basically the top of that berm down to the road. Most of that is probably actually in the town right of way. But it's still the property, I get that point. But when that road was constructed, the road should not have been constructed that low. They cut, that was the whole point of what I was trying to show, is the area where they cut the most, that's where you're seeing all that wetness. So, I don't know how old that road is when it was designed, but if that road was a little higher, you wouldn't be experiencing that breakout where they cut the road so deep. I think that's the cause. Doesn't solve anything. They're gonna have equipment on site. If there's a solution that assists the town, I'm sure the applicant's willing to try to remedy it a little bit in that area. But, I don't know what else we could do. It's not runoff, it's groundwater that's leaching out because that road was cut too low. The only resolution we think of is some type of trench along the road. Because what's happening now is that water's sitting on the side of the road, and it's very visible, especially in the winter. The water's sitting there, and it's freezing, and then it's melting, and it's freezing, and that whole road is just getting heaved and damaged. And you obviously drive it a lot more than me. I'm sure that they've repaired that constantly over the years. And if that water can get off the road, instead of ponding on the road, that will help that road out. Because right now it just ponds on the edge of the road. It's evidence with all the sediment that's over there. If some of that can get off the road, that would help a lot. Where it's getting discharged into the wetland, if that can get cleaned out a little bit, that water will have a better chance to get off the road into the wetland. It looks like, I don't know if the town did it or a private owner of this property in the past, but they cut out a section of wall where that wetland is to allow the water to go in there. But it looks like it's kind of just overgrown and there's nothing anybody maintains. So I don't particularly think this property caused that issue. It's definitely an issue, it's evident. I think there's ways that it can be improved. There's no drainage on that road, drainage control. There's no catch basins, there's no pipe, there's no swales. They basically cut the road into an area that has a very shallow water table. And we've only been tracking it maybe 4 months. And I'm willing to bet if you tracked it on a year, during this wet season, when the water table's high, during the dry times, that's probably when you're seeing the water during dry times. I'm curious in the summer months if you're seeing that, because that's when the water tables are starting to drop. But something will...
I see it year round.
Yeah, so it might just be that water tables constantly, the water tables are high out there, so it might just be constantly cut that road too low.
It's definitely bleeding out the side of that landscape.
Yeah, we agree with it. That's our only assessment. We went out there, there's no surface runoff. There's a small portion, but we don't believe the surface runoff is causing that issue. We think it's the water can't get off the road, the groundwater is adding to it. But I think it's more, it just has nowhere to go. There's no drainage, there's nothing. So the only way to remedy that is get it off the road. Don't let it freeze on top of that area of the road, during the winter months, and you have a better shot at maintaining that road. That water's always going to be there. We're not going to be able to solve that. We can get it off the road though, especially down near our secondary entrance. There is some potential there where we may be able to get some of the water off the shoulder too. There's an area that we looked at that we may be able to just dig out a depression to get the water off the road. So we're more than happy to work with DPW when we're at that stage to try to help the situation.
Yeah, that's fine. It's tough to tell who's responsible.
Mr. Chairman, if I may offer, I would suggest that you can approve preliminary plan subject to conditions in certain categories, and then we can come at final, you'll have control of implementing conditions in those categories. And I think the categories that we've discussed is really landscaping, which includes the screening and the buffering, which will also include the fencing, then the inspection process. The inspection process, both during construction and after construction is complete, drainage review and inspection to include independent engineer, and then finally the mechanism for containment of fluid. So I think those 4 categories are the general terms, and then you can further refine them at final with specific conditions, again incorporating the conditions that are implemented at the zone change and the conditions implemented at master plan. And we'll also make the transcript available as soon as possible. I don't want to put the stenographer on that, but we'll do that as soon as possible.
Okay, planning board, what's your pleasure?
is it possible to follow Mr. Mancini's suggestion and approve this plan and have the conditions verified by Kevin and Jim at a later date?
If that's your preference, it can certainly be done. That's what council is recommending essentially.
That was just my question is, if it was allowable on our end.
Question is, you comfortable with it?
I'm comfortable with it. The developers have jumped through the hoops, everything that we've given them. Any questions, they've answered them, they've addressed them. They've got a nice plan going now. I'm thinking they're just wasting more time and bringing things back and back and back and back 100 times. You know, if we could simplify the process a little bit, it would be to everybody's advantage.
I never see it as a waste of time.
I'll come back 100 times till the conditions are reasonable. I wasn't a strong
Well, it was a
supporter of
poor choice of word on my
No,
part, but, you know, if you hear the same thing 15 times, you know, it's,
Yes, we're not looking to bring the applicant back in order to delay, but we are looking to be precise in the terms of our approval. If you're prepared to do that this evening, and you're comfortable with it,
I think I am comfortable with it. Well, I don't think, I know I'm comfortable with it. You know, it still has to go to the final plan, everything still has to be approved. And if the conditions aren't met at that time, then that's another situation entirely.
yes,
But then the applicant won't have heard our, so then they're not going to stick with it. So if we do that and agree to the categories, right, and we approve a preliminary plan, and then we hash out the specifics, and the applicant doesn't agree with our specifics at that time, right? Won't they have to come back again?
If they don't agree with it at that point, I would think that, yes, they would have to come back again, but then it's on them.
Right? Is that right? So that if somehow the wording wasn't exactly right, and it wasn't amenable to the applicant, and then they would have to come back again as the final plan, right?
Would it be more of a situation that if we approve this preliminary plan, with the condition of the conditions being approved, and then that sounds like a rock and roll song, doesn't it? And it went before Kevin and Jim. At that point, the applicant would know whether or not they would agree to it. And they could say, no, wait a minute.
But I think what I heard earlier, Ron, and I'm sorry it's getting past my bedtime, but what I heard earlier was that that if we don't grant preliminary today, and we have them come back one more time anyways, right? And we've hashed out all of these terms, and the applicant agrees at that time, we could then defer the final to Jim. Is that what you were going earlier?
That's the way we normally do business. That would be my thought process.
Answer this one.
It's just that usually with a simpler project, there's only a couple of conditions and the stakes are not quite as high, so it's easy to do while we're sitting here. You do it all the time. If you were to tell me right now that you're ready to issue the approvals, and I'm not
With conditions.
I'm not a fan of the category thing. If you're prepared to nail down every condition that we talked about this evening,
In detail.
in the detail that I think you're envisioning, then I'd be okay doing it right now. If you're not prepared to do that, then I would not be in favor of acting this evening. I guess that's the summation of my position, because that's the way we normally do business.
So I guess then, if we say, all right, so we'd like to ask the applicant to come back again. And at that point, we will have hammered out exactly what we intend to say with regarding to our conditions, because we'll have had the transcript, we'll have input from our solicitor and from Jim.
In our
And our own. But at that point, have we pre-given the applicant view to our conditions before the meetings, so that they have a chance? Do you see where I'm going?
Yeah, I don't see any problem in creating it won't be a proposed motion. I mean, they do this in other towns where the motion is written in advance. I mean, we don't necessarily have to have every word of the motion in place, but we can reach agreement on the conditions and the terms that we've talked about this evening, share them with the applicant. If they need to go back and forth, they can do that. So we show up here in 30 days, everybody's happy, we issue the preliminary approval, and we move them on to final with the plan.
With one caveat, though, you can't violate the open meetings law, so you can't have a
Yes, no, I understand.
rolling, I just want to make that clear for the record, so we can't have offline conversations among.
No.
We can go through
members.
Jen though.
We've done that in the past with Jim.
I know, that's what I'm getting at.
Okay.
So as long as we comply with the spirit and the letter of the Open Meetings Act and not have a rolling quorum type of communication, we're good. But I just want you to keep, that's the thing I'm the most paranoid about, is inadvertent violation of the Open Meetings Act. So as long as we all understand that and keep that in mind,
And again, just to refresh on the mechanism, Jim would assemble, I hate to put this on insurance, but you're going to assemble the verbiage that we're all talking about, the terms, conditions, you're going to distribute them, but our only feedback will be to you.
and not among yourselves.
Right, certainly not among ourselves. You will compile those, and that is what you will share with the applicant as this is what the planning board is most likely to put before you in 30 days.
And if I may add, Mr. Chairman, we're not opposed to that. What I would suggest is that you vote tonight to combine preliminary and final, so that when we do come back in 30 days, we're coming back with a review of the final plan with the conditions, and it's resolved at that point.
No, because we're still waiting for the manufacturer's material on the container.
Well, if we don't have it, we'll present it in 30 days, yeah. We can present that as final.
Well, we're not going to issue you final approval this evening.
No, combine preliminary and final.
Oh, at the next...
At the next meeting, correct, yeah.
We can do that.
Yeah.
Jim is comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Essentially, we would be doing that anyway.
Right.
We would be remanding it to you, but if you're comfortable with that process, I don't see any issues. As long as there are no outstanding elements that we have not reached concurrence.
It's up to you to vote. All I'm asking tonight is that you take a vote so that we could advertise it for the next meeting for final and preliminary combined. Then we make the submission of the final plan.
Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
To get over your hurdle of moving them forward?
Yes, yeah. I was envisioning in my mind 2 or 3 more times, they'd have to come back and make the same presentations over and over.
I don't think any more advertising is necessary.
just the standard posting.
But keep in mind, we have a public hearing that's still open at this moment, right?
Yes, we do.
And so do we want to close it or continue it?
Oh, excellent question.
It'd be my recommendation to close it, because you're really kind of reached the deliberation stage now. And there's not going to be new expert testimony or anything else, so I think everybody's had their fair chance to speak, and if you're in the deliberations, I would recommend the planning board is of such a mind to have a motion to close the public hearing.
Close the public hearing, continue
Yes.
the preliminary for 30 days. I'm hoping that there's room on the next agenda.
Well, that's just it. I mean, it was my hope that we could have got this approved tonight and then never had to come back again. However, in all honesty, I don't think that's really a prudent way to go. I think at this point, I think we really have to pause and reflect, each and every board member, reflect on what was said tonight. You don't need to wait for the transcript. This meeting is on the website. It'll be on there this week. You can view it on YouTube at your convenience. Reflect on it yourselves for what you remember about the meeting. Put down some things that you would like to see for conditions of approval. Because what I'd like to do, because we are going to have a packed agenda next month, no question about it. The workload that's coming into my office from solar alone is a lot. That's why I like to try and keep things moving and facilitate things the best I can. What I'd like to see happen is I'll follow your instructions, but I'd like to see us coming into the next meeting with virtually, and we've done this before, I don't want to mention cases, but we've had motions that were already prepared coming into the meetings, okay? You can certainly come down with a list of conditions that we come into that meeting with. I can share them with the applicant, like we said in advance, so there's no surprises. And hopefully we can get preliminary and final done at the next meeting, and then we're done with this.
What I would envision, if we follow that format, is that the conditions of the preliminary approval will be, pretty much a done deal. And all we'll be looking for is the final details of the containment issue, which I think is the only topic that requires a little bit more fleshing out. I really don't see this going on very long. My 2 cents. Yeah. On the bond.
Well, we're probably going to continue all of the master plan conditions, right?
Yes, correct.
There's 18 of them. So that's a starting point, correct? No surprise there. And then we're going to do the four things that we just discussed about, right?
Oh, right, the four,
So,
correct.
right, it was 3 you had, we added 1. Right. So if anybody else, based upon what they've heard, wants to put another condition on, or modify any of these conditions here, get the stuff to me, and I'll try and prepare a list of conditions that will go into that meeting with us. So it shouldn't take, hopefully it shouldn't take too long.
Okay, so if everybody's in agreement, I can entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing.
Second. Motion and a second, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. And then I think we should entertain a motion to continue the preliminary plan submission to fiscal year.
I'll make a motion to continue the preliminary plan hearing until the next, to a date certain,
May 3rd.
May 3rd.
That's first. May 1st.
May 1st, sorry.
What's happening first?
May 1st is good.
I'm thinking about the 6th, I'm thinking about the 15th, the 22nd.
I have a motion. Second. I have a second, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Very good, thank you very much.
Well, you should make a motion, I missed it, but a motion to combine preliminary and final
Oh, I
for your next meeting. Yeah.
Not really, just give me the final submission.
I'd
Well,
rather you make a motion.
We'll make a motion.
I think you should, under the rules.
But- okay, so the actual plan sets are not gonna change, right? Because if they're gonna come in with final, right, the only thing that's gonna change is conditions on this, right?
No, we're waiting for the details on the container.
Well, that's it. Okay, how can you combine final when there might be changes to those plan sets?
They're going to submit final plans prior to our meeting.
Right, subject to.
Oh, okay.
Right. So the final plan submission will incorporate if there's any change as a result of the research on containment.
That's the
Within the next month.
That's the only outstanding item.
That's it.
I'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to combine the preliminary and final plan review with the May 3rd meeting.
May 1st.
May 1st meeting.
Today's the 3rd.
I have a
What's happening
motion.
the 3rd?
I have a
Today's
motion.
the 3rd.
I have a second, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye. Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
There's someone else.
We got nothing else to do tonight, just come down here.
Oh, yeah.
It really is. You know, it's been a good process. You're better now. There he is. I thought I saw him. Have a great night.
So moving along with the rest of our agenda. Old business, none. New business, none. Solicitors report. None. Planners report. Correspondence and updates. and bringing in stuff. This was like a big deal. I was really proud of it. Starting down the road and taking a fly fishing for that.
And I think it's most impressive. I think
You did a lot of work.
Public comments. Well, I have one more. Thank you very much. It's very much. Excuse me, I don't remember specifically what it was.
Oh, I do. So it was a book. The town book.
I remember it was a lot.
The town book was very cute because we're a small town. You have to go back and tell your board books.
Okay.
Okay.